So guys, we have a potential massive game that could be headed for Stadia, and I'm going to tell you why it looks very promising to see a future Stadia release. We'll also take a look at the upcoming Google for Games Summit and some very curious things like Windows games being played on Stadia and why I think that could be absolutely massive and game-changing. And finally, guys, a curious game gets rated for Stadia, and I have to say, I'm not too excited about that one. With that, guys, let's go ahead and talk about what's happening, and it's that time of the year now where the Google for Games Summit is happening. And this is important because last year we ended up getting some information on what Stadia's future plans were. Things like the Stadia Pro revenue model changing, and we ended up seeing the outcome of that summit where Stadia Pro has now transformed into a much bigger pro library than it's ever been. Other things like Stadia giving developers a bigger cut on games, and so really this gives kind of the insight as to what's happening in the future with Stadia. But there was some curious things that were found within some of the keynotes here. First, let's talk about the potential big game that could come to Stadia. I actually give full credit to Sounds of Stadia for making this connection. I'll have their link to their YouTube channel in the description. But within one of these presentations, there was one curious one being done by Embark Studios. Now, if you're wondering, who the heck is that? It's the developers of the upcoming game Arc Raiders. It's a game that's set to be free to play. It's a third-person shooter where you and your squad form a resistance against like this mechanized threat. Now, there's hints of things within the game like scavenging, wielding tools and gadgets are going to help you to outsmart the enemy. And one of the most interesting things of this game is actually just the gameplay. It looks really insane. I also want to point out that this game was at the Game Awards this past year, and it really stood out with all the games that were actually like announced and debuted that day. This one absolutely had me talking after the event had finished, and I was saying just how incredible it looked. I mean, really looking at that gameplay, I feel very like mesmerized at kind of like the scope of the world and how you're just like these little soldiers taking on these giant mechanized things. But I mean, guys, the tie-in here is the presentation at the Google for Games Summit. They're going to talk about Google Cloud and how they stand on the shoulders of giants to build out their own opinionated platform for their upcoming titles. Now, obviously, the connection here with the Google Cloud and Embark Studios has you hoping for a potential Stadia release. It does for me, certainly, and it makes a lot of sense. Another thing to note is that the game was the only game to be announced, if I remember correctly, for GeForce Now at the Game Awards. It was their only one with their own logo. So what that actually tells you is that the studio is very much open to cloud gaming and even embracing it, all the while they're using Google Cloud as their back-end solution. So, I mean, we'll see. The game is set to come in 2022. There's no hard release date for it. Again, it is free to play, so this isn't a game you're going to be buying yourself. And some are expecting this to be pretty comparable to a game like Destiny. But to me, this game has way more appeal on a personal level. I've never been able to get into Destiny, but this game blew me away the second I saw it. Again, it could be a stretch that there is a Stadia release, but I am really hoping to see it, especially with them working so close with Google. Again, we'll have to wait and see. With that, guys, it wasn't the only thing to catch my eye with the upcoming Google for Games Summit. There was also some other things here within the presentations. One, it says here, play testing made easy on Stadia. I've actually gotten to experience this myself, helping test one of the games on Stadia over a year ago before it released. But the other presentation that immediately caught my eye is this one on how to write a Windows emulator for Linux from scratch. Now, before I talk about this, let me give you some history. If you're not aware, games for Stadia when they first released had to be essentially specially made for Stadia itself. So in other cases, maybe like GeForce Now, it's kind of like a flip of the switch and you magically port your game, your Windows game that you fully develop, and you plop it right on. I mean, technically it's not that easy, but I'm just kind of giving you a baseline on how it kind of works. But for Stadia, it actually takes time to develop, and you have to allot development time to it and working on it and having a functioning game on this cloud service. Well, last year, Stadia announced that they were working on tools to make this process much more seamless, much more easy, which I've been saying that I think is a huge deal, and I hope that it ends up bringing more games to Stadia, since it's going to be much less of a hassle to go ahead and bring the games onto your platform. But this presentation right here specifically talks about how they're going to show an overview of the technology behind Google's solution for running unmodified Windows games on Stadia. So essentially porting your game over in a way where it runs on the Stadia servers without all the mess I just talked about earlier. Now, we've actually have seen this in action, I'm pretty sure, going back to Arkham Knight on AT&T. More than likely this was running a Windows version, especially since it had zero connection to Stadia, including being able to connect the Stadia controller through Wi-Fi and stuff of that nature. Obviously, the big question here, guys, is does this mean they have a solution going forward now for future developers to bring their Windows-based games onto Stadia without any hassle whatsoever, which is how the majority of games are made, which is through Windows, and I certainly hope so. At the same time, this could be a presentation to showcase how this works for your white labeling service, or maybe it's both, but it does have the potential to be pretty huge. The thing is that people need to keep in mind that if you were to do this for bringing your Windows game to Stadia, you have to make sure it's actually using the Stadia UI, the friends list, the Stadia controller, Wi-Fi Connect, and all the special Stadia stuff there is. I think that's important, so we'll see what this presentation showcases. There is some other ones set to happen as well, but not sure if there is really as much newsworthy just yet. And really, a lot of these do get very technical, and you can tell I'm not that savvy at knowing that side of it, but once a lot of these other presentations happen, sometimes we get some information we didn't know about. Either way, I will say, guys, on March 15th, I'm going to be all ears. That's when all these presentations will happen. And last year, it really brought us a lot of new information, and I'm really hoping to see more of the same this year. You're going to want to stay tuned to this channel so I can break it all down for you guys, since it can really be pretty much hours of presentations to watch through. Anyways, guys, finally to end the video, the ESRB rated the game House of Dead for Stadia, the popular arcade game. I've probably played this a dozen times in my life at arcades. It's really an odd title on a console because it has the cursor-based gaming on it, or I should say the cursor-based gameplay. So I'm guessing you're going to have to kind of move your joystick on your gamepad to kind of kill things. What made these games fun at the arcade is you had like a little plastic gun to shoot. So I have to say I'm not really that excited about this, or really it's going to be my jam in any way, but we'll see how this gets implemented. It was announced for the Nintendo Switch some time ago, and to me that makes a little more sense because you can kind of use the Joy-Cons, but the Stadia controller, I mean, I guess maybe the mouse could be a little bit fun with this. Either way, we'll see how it looks. Guys, I'm Sunny, and as always, I'll see you in the clouds.